This is the opening of The Wilderness Way, an Irish-American historical fiction. Huge, angry waves constantly pounded the cliffs of the northwest corner of Ireland, shaping a coastline that on a map appeared to lean backwards in almost terrified awe of the Atlantic Ocean and the New World on the other side. Beyond the shoreline stretched the emerald green fields of undulating farmland, divided into patches by a labyrinth of dry stone walls. Declan Conaghan built and mended these walls, like his father before him and his father before that. He was proud of the walls, and maintaining them felt like he was taking care of his dad's legacy. At 20 years old, his large, rough hands bore the evidence. He loved the landscape he was born into, not just for its wild scenery. He was in awe of its power and ability to make life or snuff it out. Sometimes Declan and his brother Michael came down to fish in Port na Bla, off the stone pier their dad had helped build. It was like a pilgrimage. They would sit in silence and remember how hard he and the rest of the stone-breaking gang had toiled. They had worked 9-hour days, bashing, belting, battering rocks into bricks. His dad had told him it gave the authorities a reason to provide the men with relief, rather than just giving them charitable handouts. "Better than ending up in yon workhouse," he'd said repeatedly, and made him promise that if anything should happen to him, they wouldn't go into the workhouse. The great hunger was behind them, but there was always a fear among the tenants that the crops could fail as disastrously again. Beyond the coastal fishing villages, the land swept higher into brown moorland, rich in the dark brown turf that the brothers spent long hours digging. They stacked the turf bricks in pyramids and left them to dry, just like their ancestors had done before them. It was a communal effort to cut the turf, with labourers from miles around the area working together at each man's plot in turn to harvest the rich, dark fuel.
Hello and welcome to Novel Ideas. It's lovely to be in the studio today with a local author and former journalist, Anne Madden. She's here to tell us about her first book, which is called The Wilderness Way. Anne, you're very welcome.
Thanks for having me in, Debbie.
Tell me the story about The Wilderness Way and how it came about.
Well, as you say, it is my first novel, hopefully not my only novel, but I frequently go to Donegall on holiday, and one of our favourite spots is Glenveigh National Park. And it was probably more than 10 years ago that we were visiting the castle, and I learnt about the evictions that had happened there back in 1861. And it was a real tragic story about how the landlord evicted more than 240 people, including well over 150 children, out of their homes one very cold spring. And when I read more about the true story of the castle and how it was built and these evictions, I thought it was really interesting, the connections with America. And my background, I have a history degree and I'd studied the American Civil War. So it was a little bit like a light bulb moment when I was there in Glenveigh Castle. And I thought, gosh, I could really write a story and bring this horror of what happened to life. There's not, in my opinion, much in the way of Irish historical fiction, really. There has been more and more in recent years, but I just thought it was a story that I could tell. So it's a fictional cross-Atlantic novel set in the 1860s, and it takes in the American Civil War. And yeah, there's lots for anyone who's interested in that period, but also just interested in a story about family and loss.
And it's quite a poignant story. We have this main character, Declan, and you sort of chart his journey of finding his way in rural Ireland, I suppose, in the end, and going to America, being enlisted in the war and things. So how did you build the character up? Or was this from history? Did you get it from history, or did you add to it yourself?
As I say, this is the first time I've written a novel, and developing the characters was probably the biggest challenge of the book. Back in about 2014, I submitted the manuscript, an early version of the manuscript, to a literary agency, and I won a mentoring package. So it was called the Spotlight First Novel competition. And the woman there, Marion Urch, really helped me with developing point of view. So I settled on a story from two perspectives. So I tell the story from the landlord, John Adair, and a fictional character, Declan Conaghan. So it's told through the eyes of the oppressor and the oppressed, to try and kind of give it a more rounded picture. I didn't want the story to be, and I don't think it is, completely black and white. There is a reason why the landlord evicts the tenants, maybe not justified, but I wanted to, try and explore John Adair's real life character. And the character for Declan Conaghan kind of started to write itself, because when I studied a bit more about the evictions, I discovered there was a list of families that were evicted, and I looked at that list, and from that I saw that there was a Conaghan family, a single mother with family living in the house. And so I started to create a backstory. The evictions happened just about 10 years after the Great Famine, and I imagined that these people probably suffered through the famine years as well. So that's how I fictionalised the father of this household died in the famine, and that this family then were subjected to this horror just 10 years later, and how they dealt with that. And then because I wanted to bring in the American Civil War side of it, because as you know, lots of people that were evicted in those days were forced to emigrate. So the fact that the American Civil War happened, and that's again what sparked my imagination, was the fact that the actual evictions in real life happened in April 1861, which was the very month that the American Civil War erupted. So I kind of wondered, what if some of those that were evicted ended up emigrating to America, and what if they were caught up in the Civil War? We do know that lots of Irish did fight on both sides in the American Civil War, and I was just intrigued by this. Without a spoiler, there's another big connection between Glenveigh Castle, John Adair, and America, but it maybe spoils the story a bit. And Glenveigh Castle itself has so many connections with the United States. The last owner of the castle was a man called Henry McElhinney, who then sold the castle to the Irish state. And he himself was the son of a millionaire businessman who was an Irish expat. And Henry McElhinney was a well-known artist. So there's lots of I just find it fascinating, the connections from this very remote and beautiful, stunning part of Donegall with America. And so that's quite a long-winded way of explaining where Declan Conaghan came from.
So you did a lot of research for this book. Tell me more about the historical side of it and what you did in terms of research.
There was a fair bit of research. I did, as I said, a modern history degree, and for the first time at uni I studied the American Civil War. I studied that 1800s period of how America, grew in the United States development. The American Civil War itself is to this day still the bloodiest conflict that America's ever engaged in. There were more than 620,000 people killed and millions more injured. And the shocking thing about it is that this was Americans doing this to fellow Americans. And for those who don't know, the American Civil War was sparked by sort of decades-long conflict over the expansion of slavery in the States. But it was a topic that I just really grew to, be fascinated by and really interested in. And there is quite a bit of literature around the American Civil War, maybe not so much connecting it with Irish history. And so that was a goal of mine, to try and bring those two together. In terms of the Irish history, I actually didn't study a lot of Irish history at school. I mean, I don't know about you, Debbie, but the curriculum in my days at school in the 80s, 90s was very much the Second World War, bit of the First World War, Nazi Germany. We did an awful lot of that, which was really interesting as well. But I mean, a lot of my Irish history is self-taught. I find it incredible that, I didn't really know much about the famine, and it was such a cataclysmic event in the history of these islands. there's so much revisionist history about the famine too, and we're only really kind of, there's been a long period of, well, after the actual famine, of people not wanting to talk about it. It was so traumatic. So the book itself isn't really about the famine, it's that sort of the backdrop to the story. So
yeah, it was 10 years previously, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Starts off, yes, okay.
So
yes.
that was kind of, a bit of that was self-taught and again interesting, but I wanted to weave those themes in to tell a story about, you know, people that lived, you know, not far from here in Donegall, and the struggles they had, you know, both local struggles and then the bigger picture historically.
And would you have a technique of writing? Did you sit down every day and go, right, I'm going to write 10 pages today? Or was it like when something came to you and you just let it all flow?
Sometimes you have you know, there's something in you that you really want to write. I'm not, I think I am quite disciplined, but there's times where your attention isn't focused on it. You know, life events happen, it gets in the way. I think I went through about 2 or 3 different house renovations when I was trying to, like, you know, find time to write the story. So that didn't help. Yeah, I mean, I think the advice I would give to anyone else starting out writing is to try and write every day if you can, because then you're in a bit of a flow. If you only write, say, once or twice a month, you start to forget what the story is about. It's good to have that consistency. So even if you only sit down for half an hour, that's better than nothing. And there's some days I could write several thousand words, and there's other days I maybe, you know, finish staring at a blank page and I've written 500 words. And keep everything, you know, when you're, at least we have the luxury of computers these days, and you can edit and paste and, you know, redraft, but always keep what you've written because you could come back to it. And the version of the book that's now published is very different from what I started with, you know, so it's been a really interesting journey.
And how long did it take you to write the book in total?
Well, from inception, from the idea that I first had to actually it coming out, it's been about 10 years. I think anyone who's a full-time writer would, you know, if I was working full-time, yeah, I probably would have done it in half that time, but it's just juggling it with, you know, with work and, but I wouldn't have, you know, it wasn't 10 years solid writing, you know. So this section is about the evictions at Glenveigh. He watched in horror as Sheriff Cruikshank, who'd been sent in from Letterkenny, strode up the path to the Bradleys' cabin. The sheriff unrolled the eviction notice, which was looking a bit tattered on the 3rd day of their mission. There was a brief exchange of words which Declan strained to hear, partly drowned out by the loud sobbing below as they realised the brigade was in sight. Michael had hollered up to him, pointing across at their neighbours, but Declan simply nodded, staring transfixed. Suddenly, Alex's posture changed. Declan watched aghast as he gripped the wooden door with both hands until his knuckles whitened. His pipe fell from his mouth and the contents spilled onto the sheriff's polished boot. He flicked the ash off and turned to face the snarling gang that had emerged from the lines of police who packed into the small yard. Breege stood by the stone wall, holding little Brigine tightly, her hands carefully shielding her eyes. She watched her husband being roughly pushed from the doorway. Rory was gathering bits and pieces from the cottage, which he'd bundled into a wheelbarrow. From the corner of his eye, Declan spotted the flick of a red, bushy tail. A fox stood watching the scene, sniffing the acrid air. Another scavenger, he thought. "Tell the old man to get out of the way or we'll clobber him," yelled one of the gang. Declan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the hammer in his hand. He could kill at least one of the bastards before they wrecked the Bradleys' home. One blow to the back of the head, like Murray got. But the sight of a police rifle pointed at Rory as he shifted the wheelbarrow out onto the lane made him reconsider. They'd kill me first, he thought, and then what use would I be to anyone? The gang seemed to have a system. First, they flung out any objects or possessions with an almost gleeful disregard for anything fragile. Metal tongs, an empty salt box, and a picture frame landed in a clatter in the yard. The police simply stood by watching. Declan thought some of the officers seemed to hang their heads in shame. Others watched it like it was some sort of sport. Alex stood blinking in amazement as his life's possessions flew past him. The St. Bridget's cross landed at the feet of one of the policemen, who kicked it aside. Suddenly he saw Alex put his hand to his mouth and run towards the door. He was hit by a wooden spoon, and then a much more coveted wooden instrument flew over his head and landed with a crack in the yard. From his rooftop perch, Declan saw the distinctive curves of his beloved violin. There was a loud yelp, like that of a wounded creature, and the old man was upon his knees nursing his most prized possession. The willow shaft lay in two parts, drooping like the weeping version of the tree it was carved from. The strings that had entertained and soothed them all at many a ceilidh over the years now lay limp and damaged. Declan tried to look away, his anger boiling, but he felt helpless to do anything. Rory shook his fists at the gang, but the police had formed a wall between the tenants and the cottage. Alex scooped up his wrecked violin, like it was an injured child, and carried it over to the wall, where his wife now stood in stunned silence. This wasn't just an eviction, Declan thought. This was an eradication of their lives.
Someone who's not into history, it was very enlightening for me. I'm enjoying reading it. I still.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yes,
Thank you.
It's definitely something for people who aren't even into history to read. And the Irish history element, as you say as well, is really good, because I'm learning more about that part of Ireland also, thanks to that, to your writing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And in terms of the challenges, did you have any challenges writing the book? Did you feel it was maybe going the wrong direction, or or merging the two worlds together and the characters?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the point of view part of it really was a big challenge at the start. I began actually with the point of view being the sister in the book, Cara, and I thought I was going to be writing the book from this woman's perspective. But as the story was unfolding, I realised the middle section of the book is all about the American Civil War. And I realised that I really had to write it from the soldier's perspective in the war. And Cara was unlikely to have been fighting in the Civil War. So although when I did some historical research, I discovered there were women who dressed up as men to fight in the war, which was fascinating. I kept going down these little avenues and thinking, oh, I could do that. So maybe that's for another day. But I think I changed who the character of the main protagonist was going to be several times. And the other big challenge with writing it was how to end the story. So I struggled with that quite a bit. So I'll not spoil it again, but I am working on a follow-up, because the events at Glenveigh, really, you could write 3 volumes about it, really, or a historical fiction or even a factual book. So I finished the book where I did, with the intention of this was it, but I've now I've been working on a draft of a follow-up. So it's going another direction. Again, there's more life to the story, let's say.
Do you want to give us a wee bit more about that, or can you say anything?
Yeah, absolutely. It's this past year I've been working on a first draft of a follow-up story, and partly because readers had said they really thought they wanted to read more. Some people said when it came to the end they were looking for the next chapter, So, and it is published by One More Chapter, which is the imprint of HarperCollins, that they thought there was more to the story that I could write another book about. So I'm hoping that it's not going to take me 10 years, this one, but I'm working on a follow-up which is focused on one person's perspective. Again, I'll not spoil that maybe, but yeah, it's the next stage of the book will take me to America. So I was very fortunate there before Christmas. The Arts Council of Northern Ireland have given me a grant to do that research work and also promote this book in the States. So I go in May out to do a bit of a book tour and a bit of a research tour. I'm heading to Boston first, then on to Colorado, Texas, and finishing in New York. So I'm very lucky to get that opportunity. But there's a big connection between John Adair and Glenveigh Castle and a certain ranch in Texas.
Lovely, that's going to be exciting, especially as you've got part 2 coming out, definitely. And I'm going to go back to the actual book itself. Can we talk about the cover and the title as well?
Yeah, well, the cover was, there were several versions of the cover before we settled on this, and I think I love it. I think it's really, really good. It was designed in-house by the publishers, One More Chapter, and it kind of shows I suppose, the cross-Atlantic element of the story, and this person on the cliff looking out to sea. It's a strapline: to save the ones he loves, he must leave them behind. And there's a kind of a moodiness about the cover, which I think really captures the story quite well, because it is at times a very dark and brooding story.
And were you able to select the cover as well, work with a designer on it, or?
They provided me with a number of different versions, and this was the one I liked best. So the story, the book title as well was changed. So the working title I had throughout most of it was The Battles of the Wilderness, and the publisher thought that The Battles of the Wilderness would not appeal to female readers. So there's a lot of marketing stuff goes on that, although I'm in a communications full-time job, the marketing element was a bit of a surprise to me. So apparently most readers are female. I don't know if you know that, Debbie, but the vast majority of women make up the marketing of books and or readership of books. And they thought that Battles was not going to appeal to female readers. So, and the name, The Battle of the Wilderness, was a real battle in the American Civil War, and then wilderness refers back to Donegall. So that was why I kind of felt that was the most, accurate way of giving the book a title.
Well, can we talk about the publisher? How did you go about publishing the book?
Well, I didn't actually think I was going to get a publisher as good as One More Chapter. I considered self-publishing for a bit. And then it was really around the time that COVID hit, and I thought I had the manuscript in a good enough shape. I sent it out to a number of publishers. I was surprised that I got a call from a Dublin publisher, and they were interested in a 3-book contract. So, which sounds amazing, but I just thought, I don't know if I've got another 2 books in me, and the pressure and timeline to produce 2 more books. So I actually turned them down, and I was a bit sort of nervous about doing it at the time, but then I got this response from One More Chapter, and they were happy with, produce the 1 book, and if there was any future books, they would, look at those. So I was happier with that, and it came out. It was actually published December 2023. And really has hit the shops this past year. So
yes, you did a book signing in Waterstones in Belfast.
Yeah, that's right.
You?
Yes,
just before Christmas.
Just before Christmas. Yeah.
And how did you find the book signing?
It's still very surreal because it's surreal when you call me an author, because I don't sort of see myself still as an author, and it's always been a dream of mine to write a book. So and I've had really good support from all the independent bookshops in Northern Ireland and in the south, and the Waterstones in Belfast and Lisburn have been really supportive. Yeah, it's just surreal to see the book actually on the shelf. When I first got the box, and I'm sure any new author will say the same, it was kind of a very, emotional moment.
And how have your audience reacted to the books when you were doing the signings, or other people that have bought the book?
I've had quite amazing feedback from people. I think the most sort of moving has been the people that have actually, it's triggered them to think of great-grandparents that were evicted, because the evictions that I write about was just in one part of Donegall, but there was a lot of evictions that happened by landlords throughout Irish history. But a number of people, including readers in Liverpool and Scotland, have contacted me through social media and said that's what happened to their great-great-grandmother or great-great-grandfather. One particular reader said that their great-grandmother had walked barefoot across the Sparran Mountains after an eviction. And that was just, you know, the fact that it resonated, you know, with people's own stories of their own family history. It's meant an awful lot, and they, you know, have appreciated the story for that reason.
Have you any feedback on the American side or the American audience at all at this stage?
I've had a history teacher based in America who has Irish family, was really pleased with it because, you know, she felt it was a great way of learning about, you know, both Irish history and American history. And I've had a number of people, readers from the States who have, you know, described how their own ancestors came over in the 1860s as well, and for various reasons. Our outgoing president, Joe Biden himself, his great-grandparents actually left around the 1850s, so around the famine time, not necessarily as a result of the famine, but there was you know, there's been so many waves of emigration through the 1800s that a lot of American readers have said, you know, it meant something to them, and that was kind of the spark for them to read the book. So,
yeah. I think if you can make people feel something by your stories, you know, a good way or a bad way, I think that's a lovely way of getting a story across, you know, which you manage very well in this book. And how do you find social media on the marketing end of the book and getting yourself out there to promote it?
Yeah, it takes up a lot of time, and I don't mind doing it, and I'm quite an open person, so I'm happy, you know, to explain, and I've put up some footage of some of the scenes in, you know, Donegall from the story. I've had a bit of a laugh too, because we were trying to film in a field just outside Glenveigh Park. And I was trying to talk about, this comes up later in the book, there's a stone Celtic cross just outside Glenveigh Park, which one of the characters built, that's featured in the story. And I was trying to film it, and all you could hear was sheep, you know, in the background, very loud sheep. So it was a bit like Auntie's Bloomers trying to get the sheep to shut up so that I could actually be heard. And then you were dealing with the wind and stuff. I'm not obviously a videographer, you know. I think you really appreciate the skills it does take to do a really professional looking take like that. But I've had a lot of fun with it too, and I've done a number of events and had some really good chats. Actually, I was invited into Hyde Bank, you know, the women's prison, back in the summer through someone I know through the Lyric Theatre Belfast, who goes in there regularly and does outreach work. And I had this group of about 15 women who had all read the book, and I had just an amazing session talking about the story, and that was just really, really powerful.
So where can viewers find out about your work?
Well, you can find me on both Instagram and Facebook at Madster Anne, or Anne Madden Author. I do regularly post there, and the book is also available for those who prefer an ebook. It's on Kindle, and you can also get the audio version, which is not narrated by me. It's an Irish actor. So.
And you can get your book in bookstores as well.
And it's available in all good bookshops around the country. So, yeah, and online, yeah. Thank you.
You made me want to go to Donegall again, Anne, and thank you very much for telling us about your novel, and I wish you all the best with your second novel.
Thanks very much, Debbie, and you know, it was a real pleasure to write about Donegall because it is such a beautiful county. Thank you.